What's the reaction to this been in Brussels?
Well, the EU leaders were quick to brand this as a success, despite, as you said, the low voter turnout. One of the first person to react was the EU Commissioner for Enlargement and Neighbourhood Policy, Mr. Johannes Hahn. He tweeted, I quote, that this vote showed broad support for this deal on the name change, and that he said that this sent a signal in order to move ahead with the accession talks of Macedonia, of Fyrom, to the EU. Another reaction here in Brussels was that of NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who also welcomed the issue of the vote, and he said that he called on the Macedonian leaders to seize, I quote, this historic opportunity. And these two reactions from the EU and NATO are important. Of course, as you know, one of the main incentives behind changing the name of the country was the possibility for Fyrom to join the EU and NATO. And over the last few weeks, last few months, there's been a lot of support from Brussels for this name change. There's been a few visits by high-ranking EU leaders to push ahead for this vote and for the yes. For Brussels, for the EU, this is really not only about bringing Macedonia or Fyrom into the EU family, it's also in order to exert influence over the Balkan region. As you know, this is a strategic region, and Brussels does not want this region to fall under the influence of Russia. So over the next few days, all eyes will be on the vote in the parliament, in the Macedonian parliament. As you know, the Social Democrats are short of a few votes in order to get the two-thirds majority in order to pass this name change deal. So pressure perhaps will be put from the European People's Party, the main party here in Brussels, on the opposition party, the Nationalist, via MRO.
But there's also, if we bring it back to the referendum, there's also been some allegations of meddling in the voting. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there have been a lot of reports about Russian meddling and Russian interference in this vote. Over the last few weeks, there's been a surge of websites and social media posts calling on boycotting this referendum. Several reports have also indicated that Greek businessmen with ties to the Kremlin have funded people in Fyrom, some thugs, in order to intimidate voters, in order to call voters not to go for this vote, for this referendum. Moscow clearly does not want this country to move ahead and to move ahead with NATO or EU. It wants to keep it under its influence, and so of course Moscow will also be closely monitoring the issue of the vote in Parliament, and eventually the snap elections that will be called if this vote doesn't go through in Parliament.
Catalan separatists are calling on protesters to flood the streets of Barcelona today on the first anniversary of the unauthorised independence vote. Violent scuffles over the weekend saw 14 people injured and 6 arrested after a pro-independence rally blocked a police march. Chanting, "Get out of here, fascists!" coloured powder was thrown by demonstrators as police kept demonstrators back with batons. It comes 1 year since the illegal referendum and the subsequent police violence caught on camera, which triggered Spain's biggest political crisis in decades. Well, joining us now live from Madrid is James Badcock. James, thanks so much for being with us. Well, we saw these scuffles over the weekend, but is there any sense that the divisions are beginning to heal in the region of Catalonia?
I don't think there are, really. I think the scars are still fairly fresh. I think anyone who is involved in that those violent scenes outside polling stations, inside polling stations a year ago will find it hard to forget. And society is quite divided there. But what I would say is that the flames have been in general, have calmed down. I mean, the government of Catalonia declared independence after that referendum, but they didn't back it up. The government in Madrid imposed direct rule that it wasn't met by huge public disobedience, and in the end, the Catalan authorities played the game, as it were, and eventually their own government was brought back in. So there's a sort of sense of uneasy calm going on, and as you see, we will see huge mobilizations on the streets. We saw 1 million on the streets on the 11th of September, the National Day, and we'll continue to see that. The battle lines are still very much there.
But we're seeing a very different government. Obviously, the government has changed since that vote. What impact is that having, if any at all, on what's going on now?
Well, I think the socialist government in Madrid is trying to take a very different, at least rhetorical stance on the issue, and is using this word empathy. They're talking about pardons for Catalan politicians when they are eventually tried and possibly jailed early next year. It's a very different tone. They're striking small deals on financing with the Catalan authorities, making all sorts of gestures. What they can't really do is offer what the Catalan pro-independence movement and indeed the majority of the Catalan parliament wants, and that is offer them a legal route to at least deciding on their future and holding an official referendum.
OK, well, how likely is that?
Well, I think it's not something that's on the agenda. We heard Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, talk the other day about Quebec as an interesting solution, but he also mentioned that every country is different. I think it's important to realise as well that the socialist government is trying to play a longish game. It wants to domesticate, as it were, the Catalan pro-independence movement, calm things down. It also needs to negotiate with Catalan parties its own national budget, which I think gives you an idea of why we have such sort of moderate mood music coming out of Madrid. There is definitely an appetite in Catalonia for a referendum. A large majority of people in Catalonia would like to vote and settle this officially. That's not to say they would vote for independence. That result, if we ever got there, would be extremely close, I believe.
Joining me now live from Jakarta is Thomas Howes from the charity Save the Children. Mr. Howes, thanks so much for being with us. Can you just give us an idea of what the situation is like right now and what are the main challenges facing rescue efforts?
Yeah, of course. Well, we're estimating that around 1.5 million people are in the general vicinity of the area that's been affected by the earthquake and tsunami. And we're thinking that approximately 500,000 of those people would have been quite badly affected. The main challenge right now is getting access to those people. So we're very concerned about certain key locations like Donggala. We've not really heard much coming from there over the last 48 hours. And we've also heard reports of major landslides in a place called Sigi. And so we're also very concerned about that as well.
And more specifically, we know that children are often disproportionately affected when it comes to kind of natural disasters like this. What's the situation for kids in Indonesia right now who are affected by this?
Yeah, obviously being Save the Children, we're very concerned specifically about the situation for children. So on the one hand, we're concerned about the psychological element, the fact that children, have seen potentially their homes destroyed. They've then experienced sort of a number of tremors and aftershocks following that. So they'll be very scared, very distressed. Additionally, we're hearing reports of children being separated from their families. So this is very, very concerning. Our team are on the ground now will be on the ground today, and they will be working with the government authorities and other actors to try and ensure that children are reunited with their families.